RE2, we're back on our bullshit. We have some updates for Remake Part 3 coming from Hamaguchi. There's a bunch of interviews that came out today from like Daily Star, Eurogamer, and like VG247, I believe. And there might be more out there that I'm just not aware of. The info that I'm aware of without like diving into like the Twitter feeds and stuff and like the actual interviews is like Hamaguchi talking about the Platinum for Part 3 a little bit, talking about Minigames for Part 3, talking about DLC for Rebirth and the lack of DLC for Rebirth. Kind of touch on like the possibility of things being different with the story, right? But it's like at this point, I'm just not feeling it. It was a fun conversation to have for a while there, but it just, you know, post remake, post rebirth, I don't get the sensation anymore that things are gonna be different. It's fun to have like new stuff. There is new stuff, obviously, with like, you know, the Gi tribe and like what Zack's doing with the different worlds and shit. There is new things, but in terms of like the events of the actual OG FF7 story being different, I don't think that's happening. So let's just hop right into it. Hamaguchi says they'll try to cut down the amount of minigames in Part 3 to make it more manageable. There was a certain number of people who said there were too many minigames in Rebirth, and ultimately I can see their point of view. But I do think we made the right decision in terms of the breadth and the volume of content for the minigames in Rebirth, but certainly looking forward to the third game and to other games. If you ask me, would I do the same number of minigames? I don't think I would. We'll work out how maybe we can cut it down to maybe a bit more manageable size for the group of players who quite rightly said that maybe there was too much there for them. So for me, I think this is a great change going to the third game. I've been, saying this pretty much all year long that I think there's too many minigames in Rebirth. It's actually a very common opinion in the community too. Really, the only people who disagree about there being too many minigames are like Square Enix fanboys, that don't really speak ill of anything Square Enix does for the most part. And really, the people who try to defend all the minigames in Rebirth, like, their argument is it's, like, additional content, it's side stuff, you're not forced to do it, it's not part of the story, and it's like, what the fuck does that matter on criticizing the amount of minigames or the quality of the minigames? Like, what does that matter? Just because it's not part of the story, I can't, like, say it's good or bad. Also, if everybody was just unanimously praising the minigames, they'd have nothing to say, they'd just be agreeing, right? They're only, like, disagreeing with people who don't like them because they themselves like them or something. I don't know, it's kind of a weird situation. Regardless, it's a pretty common opinion that there's just too many minigames in Rebirth, and they're going to hopefully dial it back going into the third game, according to Hamaguchi. In another minigame related one, Hamaguchi says they want to add a different twist to how they implement minigames in Part 3 to make more new and exciting experiences. So are we going to continue with the same balance going forward? Have we reached perfection? I think if we did just do the same thing again for the third game in the series, then it wouldn't really be very new and exciting anymore. I want to add a different twist, rearrange things slightly for the next game, and have a slightly different look to things. We don't just want to make more of the same, we want to make new and exciting experiences. I'll say in terms of minigames, it's not perfection. I think I like the majority of minigames. There's a few that I don't like. A lot of people aren't a fan of like Gears and Gambits. I'm personally not a fan of the piano minigame, though I know a lot of people do like it. I mostly just suck at it. Same thing with the workout minigame, the fucking sit-up one or whatever. I'm just bad at those in general. I was bad at them in Remake, I'm bad at it in Rebirth. The frog minigame in Junon is like kind of okay, I guess. It's not really like fun or bad, it's just there. It's like whatever. I like the dolphin one, though. That's fun. I love Chocobo Racing. Actually, coming back to Rebirth here recently, I really enjoyed Glide to Chocobo. I fucking hated it my first playthrough. But coming back and trying to do like the miscellaneous shit and a bunch of cleanup before hopping into hard mode, I actually really enjoyed Glide to Chocobo. It's by no means hard. Like the first two courses are really, really easy. I think I just didn't want to take the time to like figure out the mechanics of it. I just want to go do the story at that point. By the time I reach Cosmo Canyon, I'm like, I just want to get this shit over with. I want to get through the story eventually. It's really like the third course that posed any sort of challenge, and that itself wasn't hard either. I think pretty much all the minigames at Gold Saucer were, good to great, except for like 3D Brawler. That's like the only one that's like kind of hard, and without the pause trick, I don't know how the fuck anybody could do it. Like that shit, even with the pause trick, it still took me a while to like beat Sephiroth on that one. Obviously, Queen's Blood is like the goated minigame from Rebirth. It's what everybody wants. They want like an IRL version. They want to see it come back in the next game. We know it's coming back in the next game. I will say the storyline for Queen's Blood, I wish they would have made like the games harder, because I've talked about it before on the channel that I use pretty much a default deck from the very beginning with like Leprechaun and Wolves and like the Shinra Soldier that does up, down, left, right or whatever. Like pretty much default cards. The entire storyline up until the very end. Even beating Vincent, I was using damn near default cards. And then when you play the last person in the story, there's like a steep jump from what Vincent's deck was to what her deck is. And you have to build a very specific deck to fight her deck. And it's like, where did this come from? There's not like this steady progression of difficulty. It just like jumps to like the hardest deck possible. It's like, what are we doing? I'm not necessarily trying to go through like all the minigames in Rebirth, but like the Coast of the Soul minigames I think were fine. Like the shooting minigames, like okay, it's whatever. I actually really enjoyed the kind of like Rocket League clone thing you do with Red 13. I see some people complain about it, or either way, I don't know if they thought it was too hard or it just wasn't fun or whatever, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. All this is to say that I think most of the minigames in Rebirth could come back and just like, add new elements, tweak them a bit, and maybe get rid of some of the ones that a lot of the community didn't like. Like, I don't want to see Gears and Gambits ever again. Bye-bye. Get rid of it. On to the Platinum discussion. Naoki Hamaguchi apologized for how difficult the Platinum Trophy in FF7 Rebirth is and said he won't make Platinum Trophies that difficult again. I think there is one other thing, actually, which I can say was a mistake on my part, something that I've already apologized for, I definitely will not do again, which is how difficult I made it to get the Platinum Trophy. So rest assured, I have learned from that, and in future, I will not be making Platinum Trophies that difficult. So this one I'm kind of in the middle on, because I do kind of enjoy Platinum Trophies being a little bit difficult, but Rebirth is a pretty hard one, because I think you have to do pretty much everything, right? In order to get, like, the last, like, Johnny Trophy, I think you have to, like, do every minigame there is, right? Like, you gotta, like, get the highest score in every minigame, essentially. And you pretty much do everything there is in the game. And you also gotta do all the hard fights and, like, to get the Chadley, like, simulator trophy, right? And those are supposed to be pretty damn hard. I've yet to get to them. I've heard horror stories of how hard they are. And so you pretty much have to do, like, everything there is to do in Rebirth, essentially, to get the Platinum, which is exhausting. But I am somebody that does like to get the Platinum Trophy in a lot of games I play, and I have a handful of the Platinums for Final Fantasy games, like Final Fantasy VII. I more or less have it for 8. I just need to do, like, the super boss fight in Ultimicia's castle and then finish the story, and that's the Platinum. I have the Final Fantasy X Platinum, I have the Final Fantasy 15 Platinum, the Final Fantasy 16 Platinum. I'm not far off on the Crisis Core Reunion Platinum. I more or less have the Platinum in Remake. It's just the fucking pull-up minigame that I suck at. There's just particular minigames in the FF7 trilogy that I just can't do. When it comes to Rebirth, I'm like 5 or 6 trophies off or something from the Platinum, but it's the hard ones, right? It's the third Johnny trophy. It's the Chadley simulator trophy. I think I've, like, gotta get party level to 10, gotta finish the game on hard mode, and there might be, like, 1 or 2 that I'm not thinking of. But those are the difficult ones to get in Rebirth, right? So it's like, yeah, I can understand people wanting an easier Platinum, but I do appreciate whenever it's, like, a little bit harder to get a Platinum, and then you finally achieve it. The other trophy that I was thinking of was you gotta learn all the weapon abilities, and then also the level 3 limit breaks for all the characters, which I think is, like, a hard mode thing anyways, right? Here we have the DLC discussion, and we're going to use Wario64's tweet just because he has a more thorough quote than what Genki used. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth won't have DLC, so Team can get Part 3 out as soon as possible. I understand it completely, but I think from my perspective, what the fans really want to see the most is not necessarily DLC. They want to see the third part of the series as quickly as possible. That's why we've decided not to focus the development resources on creating additional extra episodes for DLC at the moment. We really are putting all our efforts into getting the third game out as quickly as we can. So for the moment, that's where we're focusing our time. So this might be the first time where they've kind of given us a more, like, concrete answer as to whether or not there'll be DLC. There is a little bit of wiggle room, a little bit of vagueness there where they talk about not wanting to, like, do like DLC episodes or whatever at the moment. That leaves a little bit of, like, possibility there. But I think for the foreseeable future, I was just going to go ahead with, like, the idea that they're probably not going to have DLC for Rebirth, even though I think it kind of needs it. There's a decent amount of people out there that will disagree with that, and that's perfectly fine. I just think having something to hold us over till we get to the next game would be nice, but also, like, something to flesh out, like, the character of Vincent or something, because I don't know where we're going to find the time with the rest of the FF7 story, because we still have all of Disc 2 and what was available in Disc 3. They're also going to add something, you know, substantial to the Wutai section, give, I guess, Yuffie some story there. And obviously Sid's going to have a story in Rocket Town, but I don't know where you give Vincent his story, right? So I just feel like a DLC was somewhat necessary, but it seems like that won't be the case. I will say, though, if hypothetically they were making a DLC for Rebirth, they're not going to tell fucking Daily Star in this interview, right? It's something they're going to want to, like, surprise reveal at a later point, right? Somewhere down the road. Like, they wouldn't just tell us right now that they're making a DLC. Not saying that there is one in the works. I'm just saying they wouldn't obviously tell us here. And here we are, the talk of changes. FF7 Rebirth director Hamaguchi says the important thing is for players to wonder whether the story will change or not. If it were all the same as OG, there'd be no anticipation or excitement. Veterans would know what's coming next, and that would be no fun, only nostalgic. The real purpose of the added elements is to indicate that the story might change. It doesn't mean it will change, but that it could change. Seeing something new or different helps keep people engaged and wondering how the story will unfold. He also says that they really have to try and find a balance, he thinks, to try and satisfy as many people as possible. That's something we talked about towards the beginning of the video, but when they talk about stuff like this, and kind of an equal amount, they also talk about not wanting to, like, deviate too far from the OG story and other shit like that. So it's like, how much does this quote matter? Like, they talk about, you know, wanting to keep everybody on their toes and, like, maybe things will be different, but then they're like, we're not going to stray too far from the OG story. And it's like, what the fuck are we supposed to believe then, I guess? Possibility of things being new, whether that, you know, the game's a sequel or whatever, or the story's different, Zack's alive, those sorts of things, like, those were fun and exciting. The possibilities were kind of endless, right? And I love FF7, and if we're just doing FF7 again, that's still cool. It's my favorite game of all time, but the most exciting thing about the trilogy for me was talking about the possibilities, and I just don't really have that drive anymore. It's just not there. Let's talk a lot about the ending of Rebirth, where, you know, Aerith's fate, is she dead, is she alive, or whatever, the debates amongst the community, but then you have several interviews where Kitase straight up talks about Cloud not being able to accept her death and shit. Like, straight up confirming that she died. Is she alive in these other worlds that exist in Rebirth or whatever, inside the live stream, inside the planet? Maybe, I guess, but what does that mean? What does alive mean? If she's alive in those other worlds, then Zack's technically alive, right? So they're definitely, like, in the live stream dead, essentially. But again, you have Kitase confirming that she's dead. So there's no debate or discussion really about the ending. Plus, of course, at the end of Rebirth, they actually showed, like, the blood and stuff, and the rest of the group, like, crying and mourning her death and shit. It's just Cloud who's not accepting what actually happened. As I've been saying on the channel for a while now, if there isn't new stuff at some point in the trilogy, then I feel like a lot of what we've been doing is pointless. What was the whole point of the Whispers, the fucking plot ghost, right? The fucking Singularity fighting the Whisper Harbinger and stuff at the end of Remake. Like, if we don't have new stuff happen as a result of the events in, like, Remake, and I guess sort of Rebirth, they kind of dialed that back a lot, obviously, then why did we do that at all? Why not just keep it closer to the original? Like, why add in all these new elements if they don't actually amount to something new? If it makes any sense at all, once we get to, like, the end of the third game, if there hasn't actually been new things, and I mean, you know, big deviations from the original FF7 story, then playing back through the trilogy, especially Remake, will be ridiculous with all, like, the future visions and the plot ghosts and defying fate and destiny. And it's like, if none of that actually happens, then, like, you can almost just skip Remake. Just start with Rebirth and then play the third game. There's only 2 games. There's not a trilogy anymore. I think that's where we're just going to kind of wrap the video up. We looked at, you know, some of the, you know, quotes out there on Twitter instead of looking at the actual, like, articles, and trying to keep the video a little more digestible, not making it too long. And maybe tomorrow we could look at the rest of the articles themselves and actually see what else there is to talk about, if there is anything. It's nice to get some updates for Part 3 that aren't Highwind related, which tends to be what they go for in a lot of interviews, right? And I'm excited for it. It's a game mechanic I'm looking forward to. It's a big part of the Final Fantasy series. And if they're doing the Highwind correctly, like they should be doing, you know, compared to the older Final Fantasy games, it'll be the first time we've had it in a very long time, since Final Fantasy fucking 9, right? So we're excited for it. But there's other aspects of the third game that I want to, you know, kind of talk about or hear about. But yeah, we got some pretty good updates today. There seems to be no DLC for Rebirth, which is fine. I think it needs it kind of, but if they don't do it, it's kind of whatever. They're going to dial back on some of the mini games going into the third game, which I think is good for even just pacing and also, like, narratively. Like, we should be going into like darker territory with the third game. We shouldn't really be running around doing like a bunch of mini games. I want mini games for sure for the third game, but it just shouldn't be to like the degree we had in Rebirth. But of course, pass off to you guys. What are your thoughts? That's the video. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new. Social links in the description below. Follow me to /DaveYT. That's it. Bye.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Logain, or leave it like Cobain.